All right, so we just wrapped up our baseball bit, and speaking of out of left field, boy, did this news catch me by surprise. Nate Diaz is going to return to the octagon to fight Leon Edwards, who you may remember me talking about not too long ago, who had his last fight end in a no contest after an eye poke. But this is a pretty unexpected, strange one. It's going to be a 5 round co-main event, which I absolutely love at welterweight, of course, because Nate Diaz just doesn't cut weight these days. And it's a strange one because this win should, in my opinion, do absolutely nothing to bolster Leon Edwards' case for a title shot. Like, if you made Colby Covington versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I would kind of pick the winner of that to get the next title shot over Edwards, who the one knock on his current win streak resume is that he has no wins over like real welterweight top contenders. The biggest one being RDA, which I don't want to look down on too much because Usman and Covington both have that. And in my opinion, Edwards like just bloodied RDA way better than the two of them did. But still, you'd like to see a top 5 win in there. And other than that, though, I think this is a W for everyone involved. Nate Diaz gets to get back in the UFC picture and stay active. And this is the kind of fight he likes. He wants the guys who have been in there for a while, who fight a certain style of fight. And if you're the UFC, you're going to make money off this. It's going to be huge. Like Nate Diaz's last 2 fights have, in Dana's own words, moved the needle. If you're Nate Diaz, you have a very slim, narrow chance to leapfrog into a UFC title shot, which I think the UFC would be more than happy to grant him if he somehow pulls out a W against Edwards. And if you're Edwards, you get to get back in there quickly, which you want to do. You get the biggest name for just name value on your resume. You're going to get a ton of eyeballs on you. You're probably going to still get a title shot after this win, even despite what I said earlier. In his last fight, that commentators said with every other breath when talking about him, 1 win away from a title shot. So here's a chance to get this win. And you've also got the chance to make Nate Diaz the 2-time bloodiest motherfucker, BMF, which Jorge Masvidal awarded to him the first time. That's really how I see this fight going. Edwards, such a nasty clinch fighter with his elbows and short shots, popping the jab, and Nate Diaz just has so much scar tissue. That's how his last fight ended. Maybe the UFC has like a nudge, nudge, wink, wink with the commission and the doctor, which we'll talk a little about this more as we go on, but that's the reality of the UFC, more of a business than a sport. And this is a business fight. And Nate Diaz, with the scar tissue, it just doesn't take much to open him up and get him bleeding. And Leon Edwards has this style of fight. So without a doctor who is in the know on that situation, I can see this one going very similar to Nate Diaz's last fight, where he kind of just gets the piss beaten out of him for a couple rounds, and then the doctor has to stop it because there's just too much blood and cuts over the eyes. But we'll see. This UFC 262, yeah, UFC 262, shaping up to be a great card with the UFC lightweight title shot. Now this is the co-main event. We got Ferguson Dariush. I'm getting hyped for this one. In other matchmaking news, Kevin Holland getting right back in there, stepping in on short notice to replace the injured Darren Till on the April 10th fight card against Marvin Vettori, which is just a huge opportunity for Kevin Holland to 180 his trajectory. I mean, he talked about feeling too small for the division. One of the advantages of that is you can take a short notice fight like this. The UFC loves a good company man, and a win here puts him ahead of where he was before the Brunson shot, let alone where he is right now. If you're Derek Brunson, I wonder if you were offered this fight and how you feel about that. And if you're Marvin Vettori, I wonder how you're going to approach this, because we saw a hole in Holland's game his last time out. He is lacking a bit of strength in those close, like body lock takedown situations to fight them off. And I think Marvin Vettori is going to have that advantage as well. He's the only middleweight that's ever taken and held Izzy down for an extended period of time, winning a round off him in that manner. So the grappling was already there years ago. If it needs any more credentials, then hanging out in the guard of Jack Hermanson is no easy feat. Ask Kelvin Gastelum, ask David Price how that goes. So I'm going to be curious to see if Marvin Vettori comes out with like a more maverick, like chip on his shoulder, angry style to looking to knock Holland out, which might give Holland a chance, or if he just looks to replicate Derek Brunson's performance, especially on short notice, play it safe, just get the W and then move on. It's going to be tough for him because Izzy's been very vocal about not being interested in Vettori. He really wanted Till, but with Till out, this puts a lot more eyeballs on the Gastelum Whitaker fight, which happens the next week. I mean, if either one of those guys have an impressive showing, I think Gastelum has an argument based on how their first fight went. Whitaker has the strongest argument just in how he's looked, like stopping contenders and not stopping, but beating contenders in Till and Cannonier. One more impressive win for Whitaker, and he's probably got the title shot in the bag. So Marvin Vettori going to be under a lot of pressure to make a statement here and do it on short notice. Kevin Holland with a huge opportunity, and in my eyes, Robert Whitaker probably the biggest winner of this, because if Vettori plays it safe and Whitaker has a good showing, then he probably gets the next title shot. But then the biggest news in MMA this week for me has been the ongoing situation with Jon Jones and the Francis Ngannou matchup, which I have no idea what way the wind's blowing on this or where it's going to go. In a sense, it really hasn't moved on from where it was a year ago. I guess a little less than a year ago, right after Ngannou knocks out Rosenstrike, Jon Jones says, "Let me at this guy. Like, let's make a super fight." He wants to get paid. The UFC does not want to pay him. Fast forward to today, and that seems to be more or less where we're at. We're getting a little more specific on numbers. We do hear a lot about the situation from Jon Jones's Twitter feed, which, again, this is such a not yet a major sport, which is something I want to return to one more time before I wrap up this segment. But like the articles on this from like MMA journalism are really just a compilation of Jon Jones's tweets with a little bit of analysis here and there. But he tweeted out that he's saying no to 8 to 10 million and waiting for an offer to come through and hoping it is higher than those low balls, which from a UFC relative point sounds kind of crazy at first, just in that unless your name is Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, or Jorge Masvidal, you just don't make that kind of money, especially not in base pay. And so much of the pay is behind the scenes. We might hear about their base pay, but we don't hear about pay-per-view buy numbers. So like from official sources. So we don't hear about how much of those pay-per-view buys fighters get. But what we do hear a little more off the record is not encouraging. And for Jon Jones, he's saying, look, this is a super fight. This is Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, the rematch. This is Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Anthony Joshua, the rematch. And if you look at those fights, the fighters made life-changing money. I mean, Andy Ruiz Jr. off of one win in boxing, able to buy a fleet of Rolls Royces. Deontay Wilder guaranteed $5 million before they know a thing about the pay-per-view buys. And then later on, when they get some more data, both fighters guaranteed $25 million for a fight that did about 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. So this, in terms of moving the needle, in terms of stakes, in terms of hype, that's where this fight is. So I think John Jones, again, when I talk about John Jones and pay, I bracket everything else I think about John Jones, but this fight is in that ballpark, and that's what a guy deserves to be paid in this situation, really. I mean, Dana's constantly like, what do you know what he's asking for? Do you know what kind of money John Jones is demanding for this fight? And it's like, okay, well, what kind of money are you going to make? Because if this fight does 1 million pay-per-view buys before we even get into sponsorships and gate revenue, which is back now, that's $70 million. So you talk about major sporting leagues, what do players make? 50%. So 25 million off of 70 million in just pay-per-view buys, again, before we even get into sponsorships, the Venom, the Modelo, the Smirnoff, the so many sponsorships. It seems totally reasonable, and my intuition sense how this plays out says John Jones does not get this kind of money he wants because the UFC has other heavyweight options to feed to Ngannou for title shots, and John Jones has bulked up and isn't in a state to return to light heavyweight. So it's either take another heavyweight fight that isn't Ngannou for way less money than you've got your eyeballs on, take a lowball fight offer for Ngannou, or don't fight. So I feel like the UFC has all the leverage. And just when I'm feeling like that, John Jones puts out a last minute April Fool's tweet saying like, had a great dinner with Dana, ready to move on, reminds everyone it's not yet midnight on April Fool's. But then Dana White comments on the tweet saying like, great talk, brother. So wrapping up this segment with a little bit of hope. I can't, Dana White doesn't seem like the kind of guy to do that sort of April Fool's stuff, but I guess you never know. I don't know. I guess I wanted to say one more time though, as much as I love MMA, as much as it is my favorite sport to follow, it is not a professional sport in the league of the MLB, the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, the MLS, the European soccer leagues until you don't have fighters living paycheck to paycheck. Fighters are getting 50%. And really, the only way that's probably going to happen is fighter unions, because as long as they can divide these fighters up, oh, John Jones, you want like 8 to 10 million and you're saying no to that? Well, we'll just offer Derek Lewis 5 million and he'll take that. So we can just skip out. That's the state of MMA and UFC right now, and it will probably continue to be, which is horribly depressing. And that's where we're going to wrap up this segment.